Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Catherine Holt, the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined today by Minister Michelle Mungall, who's the BC Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness, a very big responsibility in these times. Welcome, Minister.
Thanks very much, Catherine, for having me with you at the Fireside chat. And it just dawned on me that if my living room had better lighting, I could have sat in front of my fireplace today.
Yes, here we are in front of my fireplace. No fire in the fireplace, however. Before we get into some of the questions that are obviously on going to be on our audience's mind, you would like to make a few opening remarks?
Sure. Yeah, I thought I would just take this opportunity to thank business owners and employers all throughout your membership. This has been an extremely difficult time. 6 months ago, we did not think this is where we would be, but it is where we are. And so many employers have had to make some very difficult decisions. Business owners have had to make a lot of difficult choices in terms of whether they stay open or not, or if they have to close, because that's been the directives from the public health officer. And then that leads to a whole host of very tough questions, and not all the answers are certain. And so I want to thank businesses for taking this pandemic seriously and taking the words of Dr. Henry seriously and stepping up and thinking about the health of their loved ones, their family, their friends, their community, their neighbors, and in particular, their employees, and doing everything they can to ensure the health of the people that work for them. That needs to be recognized and that needs to be commended, because it's required a lot of extra expense for a lot of businesses, and having to do some very, very quick turnarounds and pivoting in this time. And so I want to thank all of your members and all of the businesses and employers out there who have taken this seriously, have taken the necessary steps to reduce the spread of COVID-19. It's because of them, it's because of all British Columbians that we have had the success that we have had compared to other jurisdictions in flattening the curve. I also want to thank businesses for what has been an overwhelming response of offers for help. It really makes us as British Columbians proud of who we are and how we approach this as a what can we do? We really are all in this together. And I just want to give you an example. Harmac Pulp and Paper up in Nanaimo has been working overtime to make sure that jurisdictions across North America have the raw materials necessary to make those medical supplies, the personal protective equipment, PPEs that we all need, that they stepped up to meet that demand. We have a company in Burnaby, as an example. D-Wave is providing free access to their quantum computing for COVID-19 researchers, so they can collate that data and we can better understand this pandemic and how this virus transmits, so that we can build out a healthcare system in response. So huge thanks to everybody out there for doing everything you possibly can to reduce the spread of COVID-19. It makes a big difference. I'm really sorry to say this before we go to a question. This is one of the realities of virtual meetings. My cat just walked in and she wants out of the room. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Oh, terribly sorry about that.
No, that's good. We're all dealing with that. I'm just hoping the dog doesn't start barking. So thanks for that context, very important context. And absolutely, I've been very proud to see all of the different innovations by business and, that entrepreneurial, positive, problem-solving attitude that so many small business, not just small business owners have, really has served them well in this period of time. But also a huge price has been paid by business. And that certainly has been recognized by both the federal and provincial and municipal, all levels of government, and the things that governments have done to help in recognition of that price that's being paid. So some ray of light from the Premier today in his regular update. Do you want to talk a little bit about where the province is thinking that we're all at with regard to edging towards restoring economic activity?
Well, the way I've been looking at this, and in my conversations, I am on the phone with businesses, large and small, every day, all day. And one of the groups that I meet with regularly is our government small business roundtable. We have biweekly calls to stay connected with what's going on the ground, but also get feedback for our government programs. And we can come back to that later. But to answer your question in terms of where to next, it's like we've been going through a tunnel. And it's a dark tunnel, and we've been waiting for that little light to give us a sense that we're going to come to the other side. And I think that's where we're at. We know that we're going to come to the other side, and we have a sense of it. The light's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And but we know that to get there, we have to do some certain things. And we have to make sure that people can go back to work safely, that businesses can open up safely, that we're not going to increase the transmission of COVID-19. We're not going to be overwhelming our hospital system and our healthcare system. We have to be making sure that the economy is going to be working for everybody. So there's a lot of things that Dr. Henry has said we have to do before we can give certainty to any type of reopening. But what we do know is that some economists a while ago predicted it was going to be like flicking a switch. And that's not the case at all. And we're learning that from other jurisdictions, but we're also learning that in terms of, from a health sciences perspective, that it's going to be like slowly turning the volume back up on your stereo. For somebody who's younger than me, they might not remember the dial on the volume, but that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be more of a slow turning back up. And so we have to create a plan on how we can build things back up in a way that's going to be safe.
Yes, and I would say one thing that is in our favor in that regard is that we have a pretty good picture here when it comes to two things. We were talking about this briefly just before we started. BC starting in a better place and then having managed the impact of the virus in a more successful way. So do you want to talk a little bit more about where you feel we're at compared to other jurisdictions?
Well, we're in a different place than a lot of jurisdictions, and we had, going into the pandemic, we were in a good place economically. We had zero operating debt. We had some of the lowest unemployment. In fact, most out of the last 30 months or 31 months, we had the lowest unemployment in the entire country. We have a low debt to GDP ratio. And of course, we have a very diversified and we have a resilient economy. And so we were doing very well going into this, but the world was starting to turn into a different direction economically. Things were starting to go downward. And BC, being an open and small and economy reliant on global forces, we were going to see the impact of that as well. And then COVID-19 came along, and we are seeing retractions in our economy. Predictions in terms of growth are almost negative, almost everywhere. And so that's the future for us going forward, is that things are going to be going on a not as good a path. That being said, we're in a better position than a lot of other places for that recovery, pointing to what I said earlier. But also from a health perspective, we've been able to flatten the curve better than a lot of other jurisdictions. So we're going to be coming out of this in a different place than some of those other jurisdictions, and be able to start from a different place, because we didn't shut everything down as others had. We looked at it more strategically and more systematically so that we could have a good baseline of our economy when it was time to start up again.
Right. Yeah. So some provinces and certainly other countries, they said if you're not an essential business, close down, don't operate. And there have been a few business types of businesses affected that way in BC: restaurants, hair salons, a couple of examples that come to mind. But for the most part, the direction has been if you can operate safely, you can choose to stay open. And a lot of businesses have closed either because of their own concerns for their own health, their employees' health, as you said, everyone taking very good care of that, or concerned about their customer perception and how comfortable their customers were using their businesses in that period of time. So when you look around the world, are there other examples that that you're looking at as the minister that we can learn from so we're not in the same position as Ontario and Quebec. We're going to be in front of them in our recovery, I'm assuming. So are there other precedents you're watching in the world to guide us?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at all other jurisdictions in terms of how they are handling their response to COVID-19. Those who have come through this sooner than us provide some lessons. China, South Korea, for example. Now we have different types of economy, different types of government, and different types of political culture, economic culture. So there's going to be different factors influencing what happens here in British Columbia. But that being said, I think it's those experiences that tell us that it's not a flick of the switch, but rather it's that slow dialing up, because that's exactly what's happening in other places. And that's what the science is telling us as well.
Yeah, one sector that has been particularly hard hit in Victoria specifically, certainly in Canada, other countries around the world, but absolutely in Victoria, is tourism. We have none, and it is a big foundation of our economy here. So what are you looking at as economic development minister? I know there is also a tourism minister, but economic development minister with regard to, for example, the 1.5 billion the province has put aside to help with that revitalization.
Well, first, let me say that anybody who works in the legislature knows all about the importance of tourism in Victoria, because we see a lot of the tourists come through and visit us in the legislature every single day. And in my communities of Nelson, Creston, Caslow, Salmo, and all the 25 unincorporated communities that I represent, tourism is a very important part of our market and of our local economies. And so the fact that this sector has been hit, one of the hardest, if not the hardest, is huge. And we need to really take that into consideration in terms of how long it's going to take to rebuild that sector, not just because it's going to probably open later than others, but also will people want to travel like they used to? And so if human behavior, consumer behavior changes, how does the sector respond to that, and how do we help them in that type of marketing and so on? And so I want to give credit to my colleague, Minister Bear. She's been reaching out and talking with the sector nonstop the last 6-7 weeks. And I've been feeding that directly back to all of us in cabinet, and all of that comes through our economic recovery task force. That task force, the $1.5 billion that you talked about, while nothing has been specifically earmarked yet out of that $1.5 billion, it's that task force that is going to be looking at what are the things that we need to be doing to support the different sectors of our economy as we move into recovery. We're not quite there yet, but we're about to be. So as we move into recovery, what do we do to support different sectors? And tourism is obviously going to be key.
Yeah. One thing we've been concerned about here is there wasn't any island or tourism representation directly on that task force. So we are working on our South Island Prosperity Project. Our partnership is working on it's called a Rising Economy Task Force here. So that will have South Island representation, and especially in those areas of tourism and other particularly hard hit sectors. So we're hoping we can feed in to the
Oh,
province and to the provincial task force as well with local concerns and requirements.
absolutely, absolutely. So I want to be clear that no particular region is represented in the task force other than the larger boards of trade. Rather, they're provincial organizations that are involved with the task force. And it's by no means an exclusive club. In fact, it's very inclusive, and we want groups like yours to be feeding into that task force so that we could be making decisions, of course, for all of British Columbia.
Yeah. Okay, great. One of the, as you just said, one of the concerns about tourism is the delay in recovery, even beyond other sectors, because of international influences. The US border might not be open. The cruise ship industry is huge for Victoria, and it is looking like it's not going to resume this summer in any kind of substantial way, for example. So that takes 800,000 tourists out of Victoria for the summer. So that really kind of wipes out a year's worth of major revenue for the tourist businesses in Victoria. So the government, federal, provincial governments have been very focused on the current quarter, if we call it that, April, May, June, for all the assistance programs. Is there an appetite to look beyond June for sectors like tourism that really are going to lose, looks like they're going to lose a year's worth of revenue? They're going to be trying to stay alive till 2021, putting off the EHT or other taxes that have been pushed off into the future, extending the rent subsidy, things like that to help them survive. Are you talking about longer term assistance for business?
I think the thing I really want to impress here is that the statement, "we are all in this together," is not just a thing to say, it's a way of being, and particularly for government. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we are continuously getting feedback in terms of the programs that we've rolled out, both federal and provincial. Anything I hear about federal government programs, I kick right up to my federal counterparts who I'm speaking with very regularly, and they appreciate getting that feedback. We want to know if something's working. We want to know if something isn't working so that we can fix it. As time progresses and we have a better understanding of how the economic shutdown has impacted businesses and what they need in terms of supports to survive, we are adjusting. We've already made some adjustments to our existing programs around property tax, for example.
Yeah.
And so going forward, in terms of deferring taxes further or having to do more forgiveness, these are all things on the discussion table as we monitor what is going on a day-to-day basis. And you've seen that quick response and turnaround from both federal and provincial governments over the last 6 weeks. And by no means are we going to be stopping anytime too soon and saying, okay, everything's good, we're done, we did all we need to do. No, we are in this together.
Yeah, everyone is kind of inventing the new world as we go along, governments and recipients of the government assistance. I say to people, I've been very, very impressed with how quickly the federal and the provincial governments have moved to try to minimize economic consequences. And I'm not sure whether that makes me happy or terrified because it's such, to me, it was an indicator that government understands that this is a very massive impact on the economy, and there's a big job ahead of us all, as you say, together. The entrepreneurial spirit, the safety net from government to work together to get us back into a good place. So what do you see, what's in your mind when you think about longer term impacts on BC?
Well, before I start there, I just want to address that government has been able, both federal and provincial governments have been able to respond so quickly because of the amazing civil servants that we have. I am every day inspired by the long hours that they're putting in, the creative thinking, the dedication that they have to British Columbians, They are really amazing people, and it's because they care about their communities.
Yeah, well said.
Small businesses in our communities are not something that exists outside of our daily lives. I know the small businesses on downtown in Nelson, right? These are my friends. And so we're thinking about them all the time. And in terms of what might happen going forward and what the new world might look like and our economy might look like, I'll give you my best guess, because things are still uncertain. And as we've learned, if there's nothing else that we've learned from COVID-19, it's that anything can change at a moment's notice. And so what I'm starting to walk away with for now is whether businesses are large or small, there's a real interest in localizing supply chain more than we have today. Most of our supplies in the retail sector, a lot of the food manufacturing comes from outside of British Columbia, but there is manufacturing that's happening here. A lot of the supplies for retail happens here. So the idea is, how do we do more of that? What is the opportunities for localizing our supply chain? And so I think as there's greater interest on that from consumers, from businesses of all sizes, from industries, we're going to see a greater level of that type of economic activity, whether it be an increase in food processing here in British Columbia. So we grow a lot of blueberries, maybe we keep them here and we make a lot of blueberry jam, and we're selling that throughout North America, right? So there's things like that for micro businesses as well, thinking along those lines. So I think that's going to be one of the bigger changes, is we're going to see a more localized a supply chain. I think we're going to see a lot more innovation as well. I think that to be competitive in the global marketplace, as it's had a major shift, we're going to look to innovation, to technology, and how do we marry that with some of our traditional industries in British Columbia to give us a competitive edge on the global scale. I think there's a real interest in that, and we've seen tech companies come forward doing some incredible problem solving in this time frame. And I think that that has created greater relationships between some of our traditional industries and some of our newer industries. And they're going to be able to go forward and do some pretty amazing things for British Columbia.
Yeah, very good observations. You know, if nothing else, wow, have people become more aware of the vulnerabilities attached to globalization and getting things from elsewhere. And as you rightly said, far more awareness of what we do have in British Columbia and how it can be used to make us more resilient. So thank you very much for your time, Minister. That was a very interesting half hour. It always zooms by so quickly, zooms by on Zoom so quickly. And I really appreciate you giving us your time and your insights today.
Thank you very much. And I just want to make sure all your viewers know that if they have any questions and need supports for their small business BC has expanded services where you can call, email, or do an online chat. And people are standing by in multiple languages 6 days a week to help.
Yes, and your local Chamber of Commerce. Resources online. Thank you again.
Thank you. Stay safe and stay healthy.